Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Oxnard Live. I'm your host, Daniel Chavez Jr. I do apologize for the delay. We were having a little technical issues, but we are here and I am excited for our guest tonight. We all remember last year in November, we had Farron Dozier join us and we got into some really deep conversations about community, our youth, and how do we go forward. Tonight he'll be joining us again tonight, but this time with another guest, Mr. Caldwell Willams will be also joining, who is a mentor of Mr. Dozier. Gentlemen, both of you, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, Mr. Willams, Mr. Dozier, welcome. So first, let us start with Mr. Dozier. Farron, tell us, since November until now, how has it been? What have you been up to? What's new? And then we'll switch over to Mr. Willams to get to learn a little bit more about him.
Well, my heart hurts still because we were not able to play this season. The ABA did launch a short season this year, and so all I could do was watch and see the other teams playing. But we're still in the building stages, so I still need to come to the city and build relationships. We still need to find a home to play in. So we still got a lot of marketing and relationship building to do, but everything's fine. Just waiting for this, of course, COVID-19 to pass.
Great. And, I know the community is going to be very happy once we get you guys up and running and, supporting the youth. I know you've already done a few outreach over the past couple of years, and so it's very much appreciated. Mr. Willams, welcome to the show of Oxnard Live. Farron has spoke very highly of you. So I'm very excited about this conversation tonight. So please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Caldwell Williams, April 4th, I'll be 87 years old. 76 of those years were in Los Angeles. Born on a farm in East Texas, came to Los Angeles in 1943. Number 10 of 11 kids, born on a farm. I guess my dad and mom raised their own labor force. And World War II. I was a child when World War II was going on. I was 5th grade, we came to Los Angeles. And if you haven't seen total mobilization, I can tell you what that looks like, because as a 5th grader, we were involved and believing our contributions were significant, saving tinfoil and newspapers and scrap iron. Everybody was involved in the war. And my favorite anecdote about that is in our 5th grade classroom, when you went to the toilet, 2 squares of toilet paper. Our boys need, so I won't say more about that, but we believe that, and so we got by with 2 squares of toilet paper. More significantly, why I'm here is I was fortunate enough to find my voice along the way as a school guidance counselor. And in 1960, because I had more students who wanted to see me than I had time to schedule, I did my master's thesis on group counseling, and my committee of 3 guys who had doctorates said, "You can't do that." Why not? Well, the protocol, uh, the academic protocol is we give you a reading list of all the experts in your field. And you're wanting to do something in a field that doesn't exist. In 1960, group counseling, group therapy did not exist in the United States in the conventional institutions. It was some weird, wild-eyed idea out there in the nether. And so I created my own in response to the children. By 1965, group counseling, group therapy was exploding like napalm across the United States. And I was ahead of the curve. So that got me involved in as I said, finding my voice and doing work that my constituents found significant. And I'll fast forward to what brings me here. Out of retirement, when my wife came down with Alzheimer's, and my pastor suggested, "Cole, why don't you just get a room in the facility where your wife is living?" And I had the choice of, in my head, sitting, holding one another's hands after all those years, and waiting to see who died first, or being productive and handling the depression that comes with losing a spouse after 50 years. Went on the computer, and I'm computer challenged, but my sons had insisted that I learn at least to navigate. I found that 22 kids who had fought in Afghanistan and Iraq were committing suicide every day. And after many years of having worked to assist struggling teenagers find a purposeful direction for their lives, I thought, well, maybe I know enough to assist these kids. And that's what led me to create a California nonprofit corporation, Iraq, Afghanistan's transition trainings. Long title. I'm not a marketing guy. It's a terrible title. Wounded Warriors is vastly superior in title to, okay. But my work worked. And that got me on a path that actually leads me to this conversation. Discovery of who these young people are. When I served, and I'm a veteran of the Korean era, when I served, we were drafted, conscripted. And starting in 1973, we have an all-volunteer military service. So I'll say something about what I discovered. I hadn't paid attention before, but I discovered about the profile of our all-volunteer service. They're preponderantly young people from marginalized communities, Black, brown, white marginalized communities which don't get any publicity. I'm talking about kids who live in the Smoky Mountains and that whole region of West Virginia, Kentucky, et cetera. Marginalized kids who don't see any other alternative in their communities for their future. Military takes advantage of that and recruits the preponderance of their people. These are youngsters whom the conventional education system fails to serve adequately because the education model was designed for other youngsters. I also discovered in the process, and this is part of my continued growth, same profile fits professional athletes, professional sports, and the military are two most iconic industries. Recruit their participants from the same communities. People of color, Black and brown, predominantly from urban areas. The white kids, frequently rural. All are deficient in skills, I call them foundation skills, to navigate a modern, sophisticated society. And so if they find an identity in their sport or in the military, and those who thrive and get both of those tend to be short careers. Those who thrive and find a sense of confidence, okay, I'm ready to get on with my life, only to find they're woefully ill-prepared to navigate the civilian society. And that's a shock to the system of the kid who thought he was hot stuff. And the first reaction to the shock is to withdraw, silent, embarrassed. I don't want people to know that I'm struggling. And the unenlightened way to respond to that pain is to numb the pain. Substance abuse, all kinds of ways to escape the pain in silent anonymity. And so what I found with the veterans whom I worked in the first year, more than 100 veterans experienced impressive transformation of their mental paradigms. Like, oh, okay, there's some alternatives to what I thought were available to me, and are getting on with their lives. But the dialogue that I'm seeking to have here is missing from the conventional institutions and those who are charged with providing solutions. The organization that gave me $100,000 to prove my concept, the Amundsen Foundation. Bill Amundsen was excited when I brought a group of veterans who'd gone through our program and who obviously were articulate and excited about their newfound lives. Bill's excited, but it's a family foundation. And the preponderance of his board, who are family members of the board, said, no, we don't want to shift our focus. We put our name on buildings because Hammond's money came from home savings and loan, which was a home mortgage business. I was disappointed to find that beyond the rhetoric of thank you for your service, privately, we don't want to spend our money on riffraff. Kids who would put their lives on the line in Iraq and Afghanistan are in some quarters privately described as riffraff. So we ran out of money. And California foundations who are very rich, we were knocking on their door and they said, oh, we've moved on. Veterans were our focus last year, as if these kids have gone away. And so that's kind of what brings me here. Another thing that I discovered, and I'll shut up for a moment. All marginalized children are damaged by lives of exclusion. I didn't say that very well. Exclusion inflicts injury upon every excluded child, every excluded person. And that has not been a part of our dialogue, our national dialogue. Our civil rights organizations have preponderantly chosen the strategy of pointing to how we're victims of segregation, of discrimination, of slavery, all of which is true. I'm asserting that in addition, we are injured by the exclusion and the injuries to our mind, to our brain. We inevitably and undeniably damaged by buying into the assertion that we are inferior, we're inadequate, and we're enslaved because of our inadequacy. And despite our protests, our children pick that up. The education system reinforces it. I was recently in a conversation and some people were nearby listening to the conversation. I was searching for the title that the education system used to pigeonhole youngsters whom they saw as not going anywhere. And one fellow spoke up and said, special ed. We were labeled special ed kids. This is a Latino man, articulate, bright as the sunshine, who had gone through the education system as a special ed student. And it took 3 sentences for him to say, yeah, I was being raised by a single mom who had no education, and I was left to survive on my own. I was in special ed classes because the teachers didn't want to bother with me. And as soon as I turned 14 or 15, I joined the gang because they wanted me. I had a place. And that later on in this conversation, if you're interested, I'd like to talk a bit about our need to belong, the human need to belong somewhere. So that's a little bit about from whence I come. And I'm still kicking on all fours.
Well, Mr. Willams, that is a lot. And believe me, we're going to do our best to try to touch on all of those topics. Because the reality is that they all tie into each other,
Yes.
Military, sense of belonging, the institutions that we rely on, such as education and local organizations that are supposed to be emphasizing our youth. It's funny because my wife and I, we have this conversation in regards to our medical insurance provider and how I'm considered to be overweight because of my height and my weight. And it's like, I don't look overweight. I don't feel overweight. But after talking to some coworkers, they said, well, that wasn't made for us. It was a certain template that they took and said, everybody has to fall within this template. And as you know, with your knowledge, Farron knows with his knowledge, that templates don't work for people. Going through school, I had my challenges. I was put in remedial classes in elementary or assisted classes that I had to go into smaller groups. And it was based off of the level and the way that I was able to learn was more of a hands-on and visual learner. And classrooms aren't really like that for the most part, unless you have a very well-seasoned teacher that has that ability to be able to reach to all the students. But when you're dealing with different levels of students, it makes it very, very hard. And it kind of ties into our communities. We know the first thing that always goes through budget cuts when cities or governments cut a budget, it's all recreational. it's all youth programs, senior services, all of those get cut first, because they are looked at as expendable. It's not necessary, which is completely false. We have our youth. We need to, I've always been a huge proponent of saying that we need to intervene now rather than later. And a lot of people have said that over the years and even way before me. And that's the best model. But I do want to make a quick point out one comment that was posted on the live. It says that we recruit heavily from marginalized communities. This is the only opportunity some of our kids will ever have. It would be cheaper for taxpayers to skip sending them to war and just send them straight to college. I completely agree with that. And I agree with what you were saying, Mr. Willams, in regards to who are their target base. And we are seeing the Latinos, we are seeing the Blacks, we are seeing the Asians, we are seeing those marginalized white communities that are constantly going and fighting these wars. And it is all for democracy and, for liberty, but there is no resources after. And Farron, we spoke about this last time, the lack of resources that our men in uniform have after they come back from war and try to transition back into their, one more comment is that there's a reason why recruiters never go into rich or wealthy neighborhoods. Well, we already know the reason behind that. A lot of people are in those communities, they're well connected. They'll never have to deal with that, and they don't need an out. They have mommy and daddy most of the time.
May I speak to that for a moment?
Yes, go ahead, please.
And in the military, as well as sports, the leadership model is you control through dominance and intimidation. Speaking heads related to what's going on in Washington, D.C. now. We have the biggest and baddest military in the history of the planet, and the number one item that's never resisted by Congress is raising the defense budget so that we are able to dominate and intimidate and have our way in the world. And so these young people whose education occurs in the military, Farron can talk to you about that, learn that model. And since that's the most impactful education they have, they seek to take that model to their personal lives. And so spousal abuse, child abuse, the constant physical struggles as a way to resolve issues is the only model they have. And it's not as explicitly articulated, but sports operate on the same model. You want to win a championship, got to dominate the opposition so you get the biggest and baddest guys on your team. And so the other part of our community, the more enlightened and educated part of our community, is ahead of this model in evolution and no longer beat their kids. Okay. And I was recently in a situation where the preponderant attitude there was, all these kids need a good ass kicking. So, that's what happened to us. And half the guys who were saying that's what happened to us were just out of prison. So that shows how well it works.
Yeah. And one of the things, is great about this conversation is the opportunity of the mindset shift that we can create, because if you focus on with that child who you want to be in life, then that education choice can go along with that. And we talk to children when they're 5, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? But then somewhere along that line, there's a dream killer that said, you can't do that. You got to go to get a job. You got to go to college. You got to go do this. And so sometimes that, and Caldwell focuses on inclusion and exclusion, that child dreams gets destroyed or whatever happens to that thought process. And now it's the mindset of, okay, I got to go to school, but what about that life purpose? What about that conversation that you were born to serve and give back to your generation? Like, those are the things that I tell my daughters, like, okay, if you want to go to college, go find your purpose and go to school in that, and that gives that much more drive. And if you have ideas of psychology and you have things that you want to bring to that conversation, well, get that certificate so you could be in the room with those people and change and bring your ideas to that table. And sometimes, if you're fortunate like me, you still get involved in those rooms because you've done some education and you've learned about yourself. But the thing that we want to bring is that piece that's missing, and Caldwell has achievement skills and dialogue skills that, if you look at the empirical truth, there are missing, and these inclusion and exclusion conversations are at the core, and they're just human flaws, and there's a solution, and we want to bring that to the community of Oxnard through our platform of basketball and our awareness. And so I'm grateful, because this is real life change.
Well, I know we're not going to be able to solve the challenges all in one conversation, but Farron, as you know, back in November when you were on the show, we started the conversation, and it was a conversation that needed to be had. And sometimes, and we talked about this, those uncomfortable conversations need to occur. Yeah. So that there is some type of growth, some type of change that comes from it. So let's start with our youth right now in our communities. As you know, and many of our viewers know, COVID-19 has rocked the way our youth are in the community. Since March of last year, through lockdowns, through openings and lockdowns again, our youth have been out of school since March of last year. Seniors are losing out on graduations, proms, and other milestones in their lives. And we are seeing our youngest population, our toddlers, that are experiencing classes through a computer screen, no interaction with children. And we know from research that in the early childhood development years, you have to have that interaction with other children. And that's not what they're getting. So it's one of those challenges that we're having to face. So where does that conversation start? How do we get the right people to actually start having that conversation that focuses on our youth, and not, I guess, in a lack of a better words, not sell our children into, well, you have no way out. This is your life. The military is your way out. Because I can honestly tell you that for me, I grew up in South Oxnard. I still live in South Oxnard. Military recruiters would come. They knew many of us had single parents. Many of us had parents that worked the fields. So they're working long, hard hours. Parents are not even in the picture. So they sold me on the idea of, hey, you can go to China, you can go to Japan, you can go visit here, you can go explore over here, you can do this, you can do that, you can do whatever you want. And this is not a knock on the military. I respect every man and woman in uniform and their service. And I appreciate, Mr. Willams, your service, and Farron, I appreciate your service to this country. But there has to be an alternative. There has to be a better approach as a saying, look, you can either have this life, which you already know the path, or go into the military and see the world. One of the comments, it's easier to go to college, but at the same time, it becomes, well, where do you go for that college education?
And who's paying for it?
Yeah,
and who's paying for that college? The military offers college, so it's all presented there. And same with sports, they offer you a scholarship or some of those paid items, and you want that life, so you want that identity, and so that's what we turn to. So I mean, for me, you're going to hear this word a lot, the exclusion. I think the mental part of it is the first piece, because what COVID has done, it has reinforced, we're social beings, and it has reinforced the exclusion of not even being around your own family members at times. And so the mental, the silent traumas that happen on that part of the child, that has to be addressed even before you start talking about where they're going to go to school and that future, because that script that they write about being excluded is now their truth. And if you don't know that that happens, then how do you know to step in and make those corrections in the dialogue and having conversations? So you have to find out the mindset and the mind state of that child, and the impact of what's happening. And social media is not social. as much as it's titled social media, it's still emptiness. It's still a loneliness on the other side of that screen. And so what's going on inside of the brain around that part, and the stuff that we offer, the classes that we offer, help start to heal that process. So you don't want to teach the youth what to think, but you can definitely teach them how to think. And those are the things that we want to bring, is giving them the dialogue skills and the achievement skills on how to think through these systems. Because these systems aren't going anywhere. These systems are what they are. And I look at the Bible ages of the Israelites when they walked that wilderness for 40 years. It was because of that mindset. They were free, they were delivered out of Egypt, but their mindset was still would rather be in Egypt because of the slavery times, 430 years. So the whole slavery conversation is not brand new either. It's history. But they did not make it to the promised land because of their mindset. So what happened was 40 years later, that generation that wasn't born in slavery, they acknowledged their ancestors, but they didn't think like them. And they were able to go on, because what was in Canaan was going to be the same issues of the world. So if we can help heal the issues in our self, in our community, then that thought process will be a better way to take on what we call these systemic issues, which I don't like those terms, but those are the things that we point to when we coming from a state of, excluded from, these life experiences or these life challenges. We all point to some system, but it's not this. There is a system, but I don't believe the system is stopping us. We have to figure out how to develop our mindset and be free to think about these systems versus be an effect of them.
Let me ask, and Mr. Willams, please jump in. Farron, jump in on this one. What is the role of the parent, and what age range should they be involved in the children's development? And I ask that, as a father of a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, I'm constantly motivating my kids. You want to be a firefighter? Fine, we'll go ahead and if it's firefighter this week, then it's firefighter. If it's doctor this week, then it's doctor. But a lot of times, especially right now, pre-COVID, we saw many times both parents out of the household working just to be able to survive in California. California has one of the highest costs of living, and both parents need to work. And sometimes both parents, one or both, end up taking on a second job, and they barely make it, and it's still a struggle. So what role does our parents play in our children's development that empowers our children to, one, find a dream that they are passionate, whether it's this one week, this one another week, and then still continue to nourish that imagination, that drive for to always have high hopes and always reach for the stars. And either
I think that's an excellent question, Dave. Those first years, pre-adolescent, the brain is a sponge. A child is learning, experiencing, and literally taking in literally everything that it experiences. And so the child that has an abundance of experiences is learning an abundance of stuff. And the child and parents are the primary providers of that stuff. So they learn who they are through, I was the 10th Willams kid. Okay. My 5 older brothers, oh, that's our baby brother. And so in those early years, I didn't have an identity of my own. I was my older brother's little brother. I was my parents' 10th kid. It wasn't until I started producing a result that the world could point to and say, Caldwell did that I found an identity. And for me, and I've subsequently learned that this is generally throughout the population, that happens as I move from childhood to puberty. The body is changing, the brain is changing, the brain for the first time starts asking, so why this? All the stuff that I absorbed, I started asking questions. Well, why this? Why that? Many parents who themselves didn't have the guidance that they needed feel challenged by the child saying, why this, why that? Because I said so, because I don't want to deal with it. And the child begins to get a non-nurturing perception of what's going on in his or her life. They learn that they're asking questions that annoy their parents, and they don't want to annoy their one source of love and sustenance. And so they pull back, and I would share this personally, pull back and rather than expressing my questions and seeking answers to my questions, decide, okay, that's creating too much problem. I'll just keep my thoughts secret to myself. And I was fortunate enough, I didn't give up my dreams. I just quit communicating about them. But I also had peers, Black and brown neighbors, who always thought I was a little weird. I was an outlier in my peer group because I had dreams and I would share my dreams and excitement. And they say, you can't do that. I grew up in Los Angeles, and stuff that was on billboards didn't apply to Black and brown. And I would dream of doing stuff that was on the billboard. Oh, Caldwell, you can't do that. And so what I did was stop communicating my dreams, but I didn't give them up. And I became an outlier in my own peer group. And so sailing on through the public education system in UCLA was not the model for my marginalized neighborhood.
And to add to that, these achievement skills and dialogue skills are also for the parents. So we're not just focusing on the youth, but also if the parents have these dialogue and achievement skills, then if it actually frees that parent from all their past experiences, and now they're able to just be present to the child and listen to the child and nurture. And so when, like I said, even for myself, how I grew up with my parents, there was a strain. And that strain was, I thought was my dad didn't love me and my mom abandoned me. And so you grow up with that story, and then you look to your peers, and then you get that neglect from your peers that you feel you fit in. Now they're teasing you about the subject. So now it's like, so now what do I do? So then there's no communication, and now you're internalizing everything. And if you've already got those corrupted thoughts about your two most important people in your life, which is your parents, then that strain with you on your parents impacts your relationship with everybody else. And we see that play out in real life, in relationships. So then how do we get that healed with the parents, but also now if you catch that with the child? I was 5 years old when I made that first decision about my dad. I didn't know nothing about being an adult. That brain is taking in everything. So if we get the parents involved and get them educated just the same as the child, then that whole family grows together. and then it'll change, it'll alter the dynamic of the conversation, and then what's next for the family, and not as individuals and surviving the two jobs. And because everybody, money means something different to everybody. So maybe when they're free from their past of what money looks like, maybe they'll let that second job go because we have enough to meet our family needs of what we need, versus surviving and the father who's the foundation of the house, because of how his grandparents or his dad was. Well, I gotta do this to make it for my family, when the communication is broken at the house.
May I, you just reminded me of something. David, for 8 years, from 1970 to 1978, I had the opportunity to create a school within the Los Angeles Unified Public School System. I had autonomy to create our own approach to the curriculum. This was long before the charter school movement. And I did this in West Los Angeles before wealthy families in West Side of Los Angeles. And I mean, when I say West Side, I'm talking about Brentwood, Bel Air, Westwood, before they abandoned public schools in the 80s. This was in 1970 and 1978. What I found was these highly educated, very wealthy parents were deficient in parenting skills and justified their secret guilt about their deficiency by providing material stuff. These kids had every material thing you could imagine. And dad felt good, at least he articulated feeling good, because look what I provided for you. And what I discovered, what the kid needed and wanted was the love and affection and presence in their lives. And so what I found among the kids, this was in the 70s, high rate of suicide, high rate of drug and substance abuse, as a way to deal with the pain of loneliness in their own households, of iconic parents, including the chancellor of UCLA, who were absent in the lives of their children at home. And so it's, and the absence in the lives of the children in the home of poor families, marginalized families, because of whatever those reasons are. I'm saying that this is spread across a broader spectrum of the culture. It's not just poor people. And I'm asserting that this poor model is at the heart of the intractable problems this nation struggles with, because the people who are in positions of leadership are hiding the dysfunctionality in their personal lives and in their own households.
And it's not always something that's traumatic.
Yes.
I was talking to my stepfather, and he was like, and the issue that I had with my mom, I finally healed that just a few months ago. Like, we're complete, healed, right? And what I realized is that I was a latchkey kid in 1978, and my parents went to work, and I had to walk home and get in the house by myself. But the conversation that my mom had with me when she said, "I'm leaving you, here's the keys," all I heard was at 8 years old was, "I'm leaving you." And if I told you that story, you would believe that I was abandoned for like 20 hours. But when I went to the VA and took these classes, the cognitive behavior classes for my mental health, I unraveled that story, and it was about 90 minutes. So I was never really abandoned. I had to look back at this 8-year-old who didn't realize what time was. All it was I felt excluded because of the transition of changing schools and moving. It was like a silent trauma. But that trauma trajected my relationship with my mother, and it impacted relationships until I was 40.
You know, I'll just touch on that, because the sad reality is that still continues.
So my dad said he said, "Farron, the latchkey kid is still there. Now it's just a garage door opener."
Yeah.
And I was like, you got to be kidding me. It's no longer a key. It's the garage door opener is now the latchkey kid. And the children are still going home by themselves. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah, that's definitely not something that's ended. You know, from my time of working for the school district, there was many times, especially in South Oxnard. And this kind of goes back to those communities that, not just in Oxnard, but anywhere, if you have both parents that are working, or if you have both parents that work long hours, and our field workers, they definitely work hours, man. They busting their butts every day. Um, Many times their kids are at home by themselves, waiting until mom and dad come home, and they start to learn. If I want to eat, then I'm going to have to learn how to cook. And now they're cooking at the age of 10. They're cooking at the age of 9. Um, and they're growing up too fast,
Thank you.
not having a childhood. Um, for me, I'm the oldest of 4 boys of a single mother. She worked multiple jobs and we still struggled, you know, and it's not really a conversation that I get into, but you know, a lot of times um, we were always told if you had a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, and a dozen eggs, you would be okay until your next check. And a lot of times that's what we were at. It wasn't because my mom was a bad mom. It was just because the cost of living at times, this can go back to salaries and how salaries are very inappropriate for different communities, especially in Southern California. And how that actually plays, in my opinion, plays a role. And Mr. Willams, jump in. And when I'm saying this is that I believe money is truly the root cause for a lot of our issues in our communities. You know, we so focus driven on, we have to pay our cars, we have to pay our homes, we have to pay our cell phones, we have to pay our electricity, we have to pay for all of these added goods and merchandise, and that we will work 6-7 days, 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever amount of time that it takes for us to be able to just have that and still convince ourselves that we're living within our means, when in the reality, we're living outside of our means. We don't technically need half the things that we have. So because of all that time that we're outside of the home, we miss that interaction with our children because we're so focused on making them much money. And this kind of goes back to your point, Mr. Willams, in regards to those families on the west side of LA. They have money, but they're not getting that affection. They're not getting that love. They're only getting materialistic things, and that plays a role on our youth. And if parents aren't able to have that much money, they go back to your point, Farron, that now they're latchkey kids, stuck at home waiting for their parents to get home just to be able to get a small time before their parent has to go to sleep, wake up, and go back to work.
We live in public relations, PR, is the currency of our culture. And we're all impacted by it, maybe even injured by it without being aware. And so as you just pointed out, Dave, Southern California, and particularly as social media and media have proliferated, we're affected by it. And we gotta have the name brand clothing, and tennis shoes and the like. And so we end up accumulating stuff when economically viable items would do the job. And so when I say we, we're talking about the families that are most at risk. And so these well-intentioned, hardworking parents uh, don't use this language, but they're trying to keep up with the Joneses. Because the kids go to school and they look and see somebody else, and I want what the other kid has because the PR says that. And the school system is the one vehicle that we have has the potential, if it would redefine its job, has the potential of bringing some sanity to this conundrum we find ourselves in. And so parents and kids need education.
But you got to look at the flip side of it too, is the stress that goes on the body of the parent, which causes illnesses, which causes health conditions. So now you're looking at, we need the money, but is it the money or what the money provides, right? And so like you named off, they got to pay bills, like all this stuff is connected to the money, but also the worry and the stress that's also, you're looking at, and I've learned this through my education, is you look at the activities of life, but also the experience of life that comes with it. And that experience could be frustrated at work, upset at work, you're worrying at work, and so you have to be able to manage not just the activity, but we're human beings, not human doings. So the human being experience is just as valuable as the activity of whatever that life is. And so again, what we want to offer is you want to separate those two so you can see the difference and see your experience about these conversations and then the activity. And then you can't tell people what to do, but you can definitely give them the tools to discover for themselves. And that's where the value is. These programs allow you to self-discover what's in the way of your own self in your own life, not us telling you what it is. And it's like when you teach a child how to walk and that child got balance, you never lost it. And that's the work that's behind this, is when you discover what's in the way of your deficient dialogue skills and communication skills and achievement skills, you become free from it. And now everything is accessible to you. And now it's like, so what's next? Then you start looking at life from a different perspective and no longer just surviving life, but now, okay, how do we live life and nurture? And that's something that we see is definitely missing, and as Caldwell called them, foundation skills.
I don't suggest that this is a whole solution, but that what you just said, Farron and David, it reminded me of the following. At the turn of the industrial age, beginning of the industrial age, we were a farming nation. Children learned to farm because that's where they lived, and so they learned from their dads to help out on the farm. Industry was exploding in the United States, and they needed workers. And the workers had to be the farm kids because there weren't any other kids. They'd opened up Ellis Island, they were welcoming immigrants, but industry persuaded Congress to come up with the money to install shop training in every public school in the United States. David, I assume that when you were in junior high school, you took metal shop or wood shop or electric shop, you took a shop. And for 100 years, school system provided the reorientation of children from farm paradigm to working in a factory at great cost to the nation. At the dawn of the information age, instead of following the model that worked, industry sent its jobs overseas. Instead of giving your kids and my kids the opportunity to learn IT skills in our public schools. And the advantaged community abandoned public schools and said, we want the money to go with us to our private parochial academies. We just had a secretary of education who in her whole life, nobody in her family ever went to a private school. And she was in charge of the public schools in the United States. So I'm saying, since Black and brown children or children of color are predominantly in public schools, the ruling class are resistant to spending money on public schools. I went to UCLA without paying a penny of tuition, 1950, and I graduated in 1957. The only charge I had at UCLA were my books and my associate membership in the student body that allowed me to go to football and basketball games. Mm-hmm. In California, we had a master plan. Any resident of California had free education from entry to the highest graduate degree, tuition free. Until 1966, Reagan got elected, and that conservative group that we shouldn't be paying for these commie kids, because these kids were marching against Jim Crowism in the South and marching against the Vietnam War. And Reagan and his administration instituted tuition, and it's gone up since then. But Silicon Valley exists in California because we have educated people here. And the free education for kids created an economy that blossomed. So schools are the place, the best opportunity that I can see we have for instituting the kind of education that Farron and you, David, and I are talking about. And what I learned in this school that I ran for 8 years, parents wanted to know, my gosh, what are you doing down there? My kids' attitude towards school has changed. So I got into the parent training business that ultimately led me to a career in corporate consulting, because these parents were impressed that their kids who were on drugs were instead getting excited about school. And this Black dude who they came home bragging about, in a situation where in the 70s, the only Black persons their kids had experienced was the maid. And for your information, David, before Latinos became the predominant workforce of maids in the 40s and 50s, it was Black women who did those jobs. But it was always somebody of color bringing up the lower wage jobs. I'm getting a little bit of feel, so go ahead.
Let me one. And this is not a disrespect to you, Mr. Willams, but in junior high, there was no wood shop, there was no metal shop classes. That just wasn't a class.
That was my era.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm old.
I'm only 31. I'll say that.
Okay, now I understand.
That was my era. Metal shop.
But I also want to say that, are we doing a disservice to our youth when we put so much emphasis on going to college, and that college is the only way to get that high-paying job?
Yes.
College is the only way to have the lifestyle that you want, with the white picket fence, a 2-story house, the 2 kids, and the beautiful wife. Is that a disservice? Are we failing our youth by not opening their eyes to trades? Being a plumber, being a carpenter, being an electrician, who's, mind you, those jobs actually pay very, very well. And it's a skill versus education. And then you mentioned the cost of tuition skyrocketing. every year it feels like it goes up a few $100s, maybe even thousands of dollars. And then after you're done with your degree, now you're in student debt, unless you were lucky enough to have a scholarship or, apply for multiple grants, or you can't really find a job that's related to the degree that you spent 4 years or 5 years going to school for. Are we
I don't
to them?
disagree with you at all. I would simply say that we're asking the wrong question. I assert that the purpose of public education is self-discovery. As you learn who you are, and there are plenty of years, because it's mandatory, plenty of years for you to go on that journey, but those questions aren't asked. Mm-hmm. Instead of steering kids towards college or trades or whatever, I assert the purpose should be find yourself, because in finding yourself, you'll discover what turns you on. Now, you have something to pursue, your own purpose. And I would, in whatever way that, whatever direction that takes you, go for it. And you will find motivation that comes from within yourself instead of external. One last statement on that point. We started at a school that I had the opportunity to create by saying, whatever your interest, you can pursue it. We'll facilitate. You had easy access and egress to campus. We don't have gates here. Whatever you're interested in, we'll arrange in a resource so you can go and explore that. And what I discovered, these very privileged, wealthy, white kids had learned to say something impressive when adults asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? They learned to come up with an impressive answer so that the questions would cease. They had no idea what their interests were because they had no idea who they were. I remember one girl who came back from the UCLA surgery, what's the word for neurosurgeon? Yeah. She said she wanted to be a neurosurgeon, so we arranged for her to go up to UCLA, and she got to be in the room when a neurosurgery was taking place. And she vomited and came back, it's blood. And that was a cue. And I started investigating with other students. They all had impressive things to say about what they wanted to be when they grew up, so the parents wouldn't ask questions. And that led me on the journey to, okay, find yourself. What are you interested in? And so I'm talking about a transformation of our approach to education, which I think should start with a dialogue about what is our purpose here? What does our community need? What do our children need? What should we be focused upon and spending our dollars on? And it has to be more than reading, writing, and arithmetic. Okay.
And now, and from a veteran perspective, again, we're talking about youth, veterans, athletes. It's the same identity coming out of the military. My life was over. My medical retirement, oh no, my life is over. And I had to, through all the depression and all what happened to me, I discovered that, hey, this inherited gene sickle cell trait that athletes and military are dying from, I actually have a voice in that. So now I get to kind of focus, but I get to focus on that and the contribution to a community. Now I served my country for 24 years. Now I get to serve a community. That sense of inclusion and belonging shifted because when the military was taken away, my identity was gone in the camouflage. So the same issues of the veterans we can relate to, because after that career is over in the military, what's next? And I've met veterans who were homeless before they joined the service, did their time, got out and went right back to being homeless because the mindset was familiar. And so how do we help heal those past experiences, that career, and create another identity, or at least another way to communicate and connect to the community to serve. We still want to serve. So now I just get to do my service to the community with all my military knowledge and all of my education and development. Now I get to bring that to the community with this platform of sports. I was a basketball player. I loved it, but I didn't make professional. I chose the military. So all these platforms, we want to create these places for, and partnership with people in the community in Oxnard to help us create these platforms so we can start to help develop and again, implement these dialogue skills right along with the education process so that they develop themselves in a life that becomes free to choose, and they discover that everything is available, not just basketball, rapping, and football, and it's like whatever is available to you. But if you don't feel, if your environment teaches you or indirectly teaches you that you're excluded from those things, then what are you going to do? You're going to, like he says, go to a gang, and then that becomes a sense of belonging, or the broken connection with the parents. Like for me, that is number one, is healing the relationship between that child and that parent and those parents, whether the parents are in the house together or not. That parent and that child, there's a communication that breaks, and we can teach how to recognize that, heal that, nurture that. And it's not that you have to love your parent or like your parent, but it's the spirit behind how you think about your parent, what comes out of your mouth about your dad. Oh, I love my dad, but he gets on my nerve. Well, what does that get on my nerve piece, right? Because that could be that spirit behind of what's in the way, or the strain or the stronghold that doesn't allow that free connection to dialogue with that parent. So I'll go see my dad for a few hours, but he gets on my nerves, so I got to go. Yeah. But then you longing for that connection of what is that? Why can't I spend time with my parents? But there's a strain that you don't even remember that came from your childhood because I grew up too fast and they left me home by myself, so I can't trust them, or they worked their butt off, but that's not the love that I needed, but that's what they thought that. And so all that stuff in your brain is firing off. And if you're not getting the information from your parents, their truth, you're going to make up your own truth. And now you're going to have proof that they don't love you and they don't care about you because she's working all day, so she don't care about us. I got to raise the family. And all those thoughts that are not the truth. And we criticize our parents until we find out the truth about them. And then if you don't do that before that parent dies, now you have to deal with the resentment and regretment of that relationship not working. And this, we can heal that. We can have conversations about that.
I'd like to say briefly, David, how we get the process started. You mentioned that in your childhood, you were put in these small special classes because the inference was that you weren't smart enough to be in the bigger classes. I might have misunderstood what you were saying by that, but it reminded me of the following. How do we get this process started? With children or with adults, and especially with children, we start by awakening them to awareness that they already have the ability to navigate, to learn the skills to navigate any culture. Step one, the average newborn is 1921 inches. I'm looking at Farron now, he's more than 6 feet tall. You mentioned that you're, by some standards, you're overweight or short or whatever, but the point that I want to make is you're more than 21 inches. So you have absolutely the irrefutable evidence, empirical truth that you have the ability to grow. I'm talking to you in a language, standard American English. From your background, I would imagine you've also learned a second language. Irrefutable empirical truth that you have ability to learn. And skills and ability to learn and grow are the essential foundation skills to navigate the world. So despite having been convinced by an education system that put you in a special category, I would assert, don't believe that. And that's the first injury you need to heal. We haven't called it injury in the past, but it is in fact injury. And so we start with children, with the irrefutable empirical truth. You have ability to learn and to grow, and we can point at that, and there's nobody in this room who would disagree. Yeah. And so once you get the clarity and we eliminate the question, now it's about, are you willing to do the work? Because we're here to give you some guidance, but you have to put in the work. You're also born into a universe of all there is. So if you've got ability and you have access to all there is, what's in the way of you having the kind of life you want? And now the youngsters have shifted their mental paradigm to, oh, maybe I can do this. Okay, maybe I can do this. And we go from there.
So what does these programs look like? You know, we talk about bringing the youth and parents together. Obviously, the education system, they have their hands tied on a certain standards that they have to meet.
Yep.
And we've all heard of the expression, it takes a village to raise a child. How does the community, what do these programs look like that bridges that gap between parent, community, and child?
I have a model that I'm ready to implement
tomorrow.
And we're seeking the resources to prove our concept. The populations about which we just spoke, former athletes, former military personnel, who apply our curriculum to their own lives and find new purpose and excitement and energy to move ahead with enthusiasm, are now equipped with information, irrefutable information, that's worthy of compensation to pass along to the families in the neighborhoods from whence they came. I'm talking about both parents, and I would suggest middle school students, because remember those first years, the children are just absorbing. And for the most part, pretty much get along with one surrogate parent, one teacher, and 22 peers. But the damage explodes when they move from one teacher and 22 peers to 5 teachers and 1,000 peers without the skills and the confidence to navigate this culture and are going home to the latchkey or latch garage door opener. And so this population of instructors, young veterans of the sports military, are credible purveyors of guidance for these children, because the culture tells the children, these are your heroes. The government is saying military are your heroes. Public media is saying athletes are your heroes. And so the kids, you go to any middle school, they can tell you who's, in their favorite sport, they can name players from 30 different teams. And so we can take advantage of that. So a program in a middle school, right now my notion is a class that replaces the old shop or whatever it was that you had, David, in your school since you're so young, and an elective class every day with veterans delivering the curriculum about self-discovery and skills building to strengthen the skills that your parents might not be able to guide you to strengthen. And in the evenings, and also a room in the classroom for those parents who are available to do so. Parents of the same children are getting that instruction at home. So when and we have a whole method by which we promote dialogue between the child and the parent doesn't feel threatened because the parent is on the same path. Oh, this is what we're talking about. And so we promote dialogue at home, which is a way to transform the mental paradigm of the whole household. Yeah. Transformation of the community comes out of that.
I want to say that's to me, that's a great model, especially when there are 4 elementary and 4 junior high districts in Oxnard. So it's a benefit to a lot of youth in our community. Mm-hmm. But I also want to touch on something that you talked about earlier, and that was, and Farron also spoke about it too, a sense of belonging. In low-income communities, high minority communities, gangs,
yes,
crews tend to be the outlet.
Yes.
And the sense of, well, I'm not wanted at school, I'm not wanted at home, then where do I get that sense of want? And it tends to be for gangs. It's very small amount that there is a program in the community, such as in Oxnard, the PAL, that kids are able to go after school. They're that sense of belonging. They participate in activities. But again, a lot of those programs being city run tend to get cut first by budget cuts. So what is the community's role with providing that sense of belonging, very similar to the way that the gangs provide that sense of belonging, but it's not a positive sense of belonging, it's a negative experience. So how do we change that?
We can win the battle with the gangs on the school campus. You see, although right now only about 20% of the students on a campus find a sense of belonging in school. But if you look at where that happens, it's in sports, it's in the band, it's in those activities where the child and the teacher have a clear understanding that the child's presence and participation is a source of the teacher's job. And so teachers respond differently when they know that if I lose you, I don't have a job. In the chemistry class, first day, the teacher says, I'm gonna flunk half of you. And so already only the most diligent youngster will even stick around with that. The other kids say, to heck with that. So I'm saying this curriculum to which I just referred, pursuit of self-discovery in a community of your peers will, and I have evidence of this, results in more successful peer relationships that are constructive and creative rather than on the margins. And so as the youngster finds success in conventional pursuits, they have resistance to the gang. If you have time at some point, go on the internet. There is an alumni page, IPS alumni page on Facebook, where the accessible to the 1,500 students who over 8 years attended that school that I mentioned. They put up the Facebook page. They stay in communication. All these years later, they're all over the world now because they had advantages. But what they talk about, 35 and 40 years later, are the relationships they develop in a school where relationship development or where self-discovery was as important as isosceles triangles in the geometry class.
I want to touch on one more item before we wrap up, and it's about communities and moving forward after the George Floyd. We saw what happened after George Floyd. We had last week Oxnard Police Chief Jason Benitez. He joined us, and he expressed his disgust with the actions of those officers, very similar to what a lot of police chiefs and officers across the nation express. How do communities, not only do they have that thing with George Floyd, but we have this thing with COVID. How do we build this sense of community? I believe your program, it will be extremely beneficial to our youth. But at the same time, how do we bridge that gap with the community? And the community is made up of multiple components. We have local organizations, we have police, we have fire, we have public figures. How do we bridge those gaps? That it's fine to do one thing inside the school, the education system, bringing those parents together, bringing those students together to find that self, find themselves. But how do we bring in the community? How do we involve them again after the George Floyd, after COVID? Where do we start? And that could go to either one of you guys who wants to tackle that.
From my relationship with Caldwell, I kind of know the answer to this, because when we looked at George Floyd situation, and he makes this statement that I put it on one of our pages, is he says what Al Sharpton said, "Get your knee off our neck." That was the chant, like that was the response to that civil rights political movement. Get your knee off our neck, right? But then Caldwell says, okay, fine. When you get your knee off our neck, then what? So it's like we also, this same program education applies to outside in the community, because even if they change all the police laws and do whatever they feel that they need to do to create a safe environment for the community is still scarred from the behavior. So you also have to heal the community to be okay with the new process. So you can get your knee off our neck, but then, as Caldwell says, then what do I do? Well, how do I fly? Because I'm already damaged with these traumas of how we've been treated. So it's the same thing that happens in the house, happens in the community, where we have to also heal the community around these systems that we point to. And there's a communication break. And Caldwell can take it because he has an excellent description of the solution to this conversation. But how I hear him talk is I know that this same conversation is just as effective when it's given to applied to these systems that we look at that are supposed to protect and serve us. But the exclusion and inclusion of that situation are the past experiences and the traumas. And you look at, I'm gonna say this, Caldwell, before you take over. Every 40 years is a generation. And when I looked at this George Floyd conversation and what happened, it was like, for me, the next one before that was Rodney King in the 90s. So it's like every 29, 30 years, something happens where this uproar in the community happens. And now you look at the children. Now let's go back to the community, right? Now you have the 5, 6, 7-year-olds who actually now watch this man on social media. They've already downloaded what they saw, and then they have the conversations in their families about what happened, and then they're forming their opinion about what happened, and then now nobody likes the police, and so now this 5, 6, 7-year-old is now the next generation who's going to have that same frustration of the next time something happens as an uproar. But if we get those youth now and heal that, that starts the healing process, and they can change the systems. They can do whatever they need to do. But again, it's not what we think about the system, it's how we think about the system. And I just believe that this education will also pour over into those same conversations as far as the relationship or the thought process of all these police issues and the gang issues and the violence that we see in the community, because it's just a mindset. And lastly, when I look where I live in San Bernardino County, you look at what happened in the 80s, right? When Compton was so bad and the parents were like, we got to get out of here. So where'd they go? They moved to the Inland Empire. But guess what? They didn't change the thought process. So the same Compton mentality moved to San Bernardino County. And now you got the same mentality growing up. And this now San Bernardino is just as bad as Compton was in the 70s and 80s. And then they couldn't stay there. They pushed them to Moreno Valley, and they pushed them to Rialto. And now where they pushed them to Palmdale and Lancaster. But the mindset never shifted. We never healed the families from those silent traumas. And this education will definitely, once we can show improve again, because he's done it before, once the society sees that this is the missing piece, the whole world can shift.
Mr. Willams, before you jump in, I just want to make a quick comment in regards to that, and this will probably add to your comments. But I agree with Farron in regards to where do we go after this, and that mentality of holding on to that mentality after the fact. We see that governments or businesses, they take these approaches to correct it, to change something. But in my view, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but in my view, it's not changing anything. All you did was cover it up. And because you just covered it up and you painted it as, oh, we changed it, we're better now, the mentality is still there. You haven't provided the resources or the conversation to actually change anything. You just covered it up and called it something else. I just wanted to make that brief comment. Mr. Willams, go right ahead, sir.
Let him have it, Caldwell.
No, I agree in your assessment, David. Covered it up, and I would assert covered it up because you don't know how to solve the problem. You lie about it. You can hire a PR firm that gives a picture of who you are and how wonderful things are in your life. And it's a total lie. There's a lot of lying going on. Farron mentioned the knee off, get your knee off my neck. One of the responses to the injury of exclusion, generations of exclusion, we've become great liars. We lie about who we are. And I'm saying that civil rights icons who all my life have been at the forefront of pushing change, lie about who they are at home. And as affirmative action was implemented, which was the persons whose inclusion and belonging was race-based, racial entitlement. I'm in because I'm white, okay? Let me give you people of color a little taste of what I have, and that's affirmative action. One of the injuries and byproducts of inclusion that is not based upon who you are, is you're confused. I got in, but I don't want anybody to know my secrets, which is I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And so we created an organization called Public Relations to tell our story so that people don't know who we really are. So now, on the other side of the murder in Minnesota was a cop who killed the man, who put the knee on the man's neck. We're not addressing what his injuries are that causes him to be to objectify people he's supposed to serve. And if you get into his mind and listen to him, he was protecting and serving the people he saw as his constituents. The guy on whose neck he had his knee had been objectified as the other. So he's protecting his white people from this object. And the military does I'm a veteran, military does an excellent job of that. We objectify the enemy. So you're not killing a person. Remember now, the purpose of the military is to protect the homeland, and you protect the homeland by killing the dangerous people. So my training was about being able to kill without guilt. And how I kill without guilt was I'm killing a Nazi, or I'm killing a gook, or I'm killing a terrorist. I'm not killing a human being. And so guess where the most frequent successful placement is for military veterans? Law enforcement. Okay. Nobody, it's not printed in the stories, but you go and interview those guys who stood by and watched this man be murdered, and watched these guys who beat Rodney King. Veterans of the military, they're protecting their community, and their community is white. And one, not the whole, but a significant contribution to the solution is every law enforcement person must be recruited from the community where they serve. You can't, in Los Angeles, the preponderance of Los Angeles Police Department live in Simi Valley, a white enclave on the way to Oxnard. And they come to Los Angeles, literally in the heads of the individual officer is to keep all these dangerous people out of Simi Valley. And when I live next door to you and my kids are playing with your kids and our kids are growing up together, I have a different perception of who you are. Enough said, I know we're running out of time here.
I will just say that I am proud of my community of Oxnard because it was under our former police chief, Scott Whitney, who did push that effort to hire more homegrown people to be police officers. And we are hiring more and more people in law enforcement in Oxnard. And, you know, Oxnard does not have, you know, every law enforcement agency has its moments. But what has been done by Oxnard PD is they're changing it. And they're making actual changes. They're actually having those conversations that are at times extremely difficult to have for law enforcement agencies. But they're having those dialogues. They're having that communication with the community, and they're listening. They're legitimately listening to those concerns. So when you made that comment in regards to that people in law enforcement should be part of that community, I completely agree. And we see that in Oxnard, that those people that serve our community, many of them live here. They were born here, they were raised here, and they continue to serve the community that they have called home their entire life. Thank you both for joining me. again, this is another conversation that could go on for another hour or two. But if somebody wanted to learn more about your guys' program, your guys' plan, where would they go? Who would they reach out to be able to learn more information about it?
Let's put that one on Farron. I'm old and I'm going to stick to my lane.
My number is 323-215-5384. Call me and I will connect you to Caldwell and we will get this dialogue set in place. And again, we're grateful for this platform. Again, what we want.
Congratulations, David.
Yeah.
I like what you're doing.
We want to bring this to the community, to Oxnard, and the basketball will be the place where, like I said, we're more than basketball. There's a lot of community things that we want to take care of. And the basketball is just a platform for us to come together those nights and enjoy each other's company and play for a championship. But outside of that game, we want to have a place where those youth can come and the parents can come and get educated and get some training. There's no manual to be a parent, right? And so these foundation skills and dialogue skills are tools, and they are effective, as he's expressed since the 1950s and 60s. He's been at this, and I met him because of the transformation he wants with the veterans. And when I met him, because of my Landmark education, we were on the same page. And even when I took his courses, even as I've taken it for the third time just recently, I got another piece of my life. Like, wait, that's what that's what that is. Like, so you start to use these tools, and it's for your whole life. Imagine having courage in the military, but not having courage in your personal life. Like, it's different. It was still me, but the integrity of my personal life was nothing like my military, and that was destroyed my personal life. But these are things that if you don't have the mindset to get back to the present of the beginning of the awakening of the awareness, you won't even think about that stuff. And again, you feel excluded. So if I'm excluded from you, then you're the other. And so all of these things are the tools that we're ready. I mean, we are ready to implement this conversation and transform Oxnard, and we'll be the example. Oxnard will be the example of how this world could look.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you both again for joining me in this conversation. It's never an easy conversation to touch on these topics, but it is a conversation that definitely needs to occur to have some type of growth, not cover up, but an actual growth. Ladies and gentlemen, Farron, Dozier, Caldwell, Willams, thank you both for joining me. Be sure to join me next week on Thursday as we have Chief Development Officer Jennifer Caldwell joining us from Ventura County Food Share, and how the organization has been dealing with the pandemic, food shortages for many of our community members, and their need to end hunger in Ventura County and across the nation. That's right here on Oxnard Live, all live and 100% real. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Willams. Thank you, Farron, for joining me. And
thank you.
Be sure to join us next week. Thank you.
How you trying to say?